This is the story of what would happen if Aatrox, the Darkin Blade, met Mordekaiser, the Iron Revenant, and why the winner changes depending on where and how they fight. I am going to trace both of their histories, compare what their lore actually proves, and end with a verdict that separates a single duel from a war that could reshape Runeterra. Aatrox and Mordekaiser have never fought each other in the established story. There is no forgotten battle, hidden quotation, or official result that settles the question for us, which means any honest answer must begin with that limit. What we do have is a long record of what each warrior has survived, the kinds of power each one commands, and the weaknesses their enemies have already used against them. Those facts do not produce a perfect equation, but they give us enough to build a careful answer. At first glance, these two seem almost identical. Both are towering warlords wrapped in metal. Both carry weapons that have become symbols of terror, and both return after defeats that would permanently end almost anyone else. Each one belongs to an age so distant that modern nations rose over the ruins he left behind. Neither accepts the ordinary boundary between life and death, yet that similarity hides the most important difference in the entire matchup. Aatrox is an immortal consciousness imprisoned inside a weapon, forcing stolen living matter into temporary bodies that can never truly satisfy him. Mordekaiser is a powerful spirit who escaped the natural fading of the dead, occupied a suit of iron, and eventually shaped a kingdom within the realm beyond life. One is trapped in an object and desperately reaches outward. The other turned death itself into territory and patiently draws everything inward. That contrast changes every part of the fight. Aatrox needs a body strong enough to carry his sword and enough living material to sustain the shape he builds. Mordekaiser does not depend on living flesh in the same way, although he still requires a means of manifesting fully in the physical world. Aatrox wants an ending so complete that even his prison might finally disappear. Mordekaiser wants the opposite, because he intends to make his rule permanent across both the living world and the world of the dead. I will begin with Aatrox, because his story reaches back to the height of ancient Shurima. Long before anyone called him a Darkin, he served an empire that measured its ambitions in continents and trusted its greatest champions with power drawn through the sun disk. The ritual of ascension did not simply grant a soldier a better weapon or a longer life. Those judged worthy emerged as god warriors, transformed beings whose strength allowed Shurima to expand and defend a realm too vast for ordinary armies alone. Aatrox belonged among those honored defenders. The modern shape people recognize, with its darkened body and enormous wings, is not a reliable picture of the noble form he possessed at the beginning. His current appearance is an imitation assembled through corrupted magic, while the original ascended warrior carried the splendor and authority associated with Shurima's chosen protectors. That difference matters because Aatrox remembers what he once was, and every unstable body reminds him that he cannot simply return to it. The empire that elevated him eventually faced a disaster it could not conquer in any normal way. Icathia rebelled against Shuriman rule, and during that conflict its leaders released the Void as a weapon. What entered the world was not another army with familiar needs or a rival empire seeking land. The Void threatened the order of reality around it, and the Ascended were sent to contain what the rebellion had unleashed. Aatrox fought in that war alongside other god warriors. Their ascended bodies gave them a chance to survive conditions that would have erased mortal forces, but survival did not mean safety. The experience changed those who returned, leaving them with memories and wounds that their long lives could not easily bury. Shurima could celebrate that the immediate threat had been held back, yet the defenders who made that victory possible no longer fit comfortably inside the empire they had saved. This is the first major clue to Aatrox's power. He did not become dangerous only after learning blood magic, and he did not begin as a random fighter who happened to touch an enchanted sword. He had already earned ascension, served as a god warrior, and fought against the void at Icathia. Those achievements do not give us a numerical measure of strength, but they place his experience far beyond an ordinary military lifetime. Longevity gave the Ascended time to master war, though it also gave their worst memories time to harden. A mortal veteran may spend decades trying to live beyond a terrible campaign, while an Ascended warrior can carry the same campaign for centuries without the relief of an ordinary lifespan. Aatrox's later fury grew from more than ambition. It came from the collapse of every structure that had once given his power a purpose. Shurima's fall removed that structure. Emperor Azir's failed ascension ended in catastrophe. The imperial capital was devastated, and the central authority that had directed the god warriors disappeared. Without an emperor capable of uniting them, surviving Ascended fought over the remains of the empire and the future they believed should replace it. The protectors of Shurima became rival rulers, and the conflicts among them spread suffering across lands that had already endured imperial collapse. These fallen god warriors became known as the Darkin. That name describes more than a visual change, because their entire relationship with power had broken. They combined the might of ascension with blood magic, reshaping living bodies and building armies around personal rule. Some claimed territory, others pursued old rivalries, and alliances lasted only as long as they served competing ambitions. Aatrox rose as one of the most feared among them. The discipline that once made him a great defender now supported a far darker campaign, and the same endurance that carried him through Icathia made him extraordinarily difficult to stop. He understood organized war, not merely single combat. That distinction will matter when we compare him with Mordekaiser, because both can lead armies even though only one of them treats the army as the final purpose of his rule. The Darkin Wars eventually drew intervention from powers connected to Targon. Mortal forces could not reliably defeat every corrupted god warrior through strength alone, so the solution relied on knowledge, celestial influence, and deception. The aspect of Twilight helped mortals understand how the Darkin could be bound within the weapons they carried, turning the instruments of their power into prisons. Aatrox was trapped inside his sword. The victory did not end his consciousness, release his spirit, or grant him a peaceful death. It separated him from the world, while leaving him able to perceive the confinement, and centuries passed without the ordinary senses that had defined his existence. For being accustomed to a vast body, open skies, and the movement of war, the prison reduced existence to awareness without freedom. This was not the kind of immortality Aatrox had ever desired. Ascension had once made an exceptional life larger, but the sword made life narrow enough to become a cage. He could not move by his own choice, could not rebuild Shurima, and could not even end the awareness that remained locked inside the blade. Time stopped being a path toward another goal. It became the measurement of captivity. What nobody expected was that the prison still left a narrow path back into the world. A person who tried to wield the sword exposed himself to the will confined within it, and Aatrox learned to overwhelm such hosts. The weapon did not free him in the complete sense, because his essence remained bound to it, yet a captured bearer gave him material through which he could act. One body was not enough to restore an ascended form. Aatrox used blood magic to reshape the host and draw additional living matter into a larger construction, producing the red, winged warrior now associated with his name. The result resembles his remembered self, though resemblance is not restoration. Every visible sign of grandeur rests upon an unstable foundation that he must continually maintain. That mechanism gives Aatrox enormous adaptability. If a mortal body cannot naturally hold his scale, he does not accept its original limits, and blood magic lets him force available material into a form suited for battle. Fresh victories can sustain or enlarge the construction, which means a populated battlefield may become a source of momentum. Aatrox can enter a conflict in one condition and grow more formidable as the conflict supplies what his vessel lacks. The same mechanism creates a hard weakness. His physical body is borrowed, assembled, and temporary. Without enough living material, it decays, while the true center of his existence remains the sword rather than the imposing shape around it. Destroying that shape can halt his campaign, even if it does not destroy Aatrox himself, and separating the weapon from the body can return him to helpless confinement. This is why calling Aatrox immortal can be misleading. He is extraordinarily difficult to end, but he is not always free, active, or physically unbeatable. His worst fate has already happened to him: survival without agency. A warrior who understands the sword and can isolate it does not need to erase Aatrox's essence in order to win the immediate battle. Centuries of confinement changed his objective. Aatrox no longer seeks only territory, revenge, or the restoration of a fallen empire. He believes that destruction on an unimaginable scale may finally end the prison that ordinary damage cannot break. His title, the World Ender, expresses a purpose as much as a level of power. He aims at the end of everything because anything smaller risks leaving the sword, and Aatrox with it behind. That goal contains a grim uncertainty. Aatrox does not possess proof that ending the world would end his consciousness, and the lore does not confirm that his plan could free him from the weapon. He pursues catastrophe as the remaining possibility he can still imagine. This makes him reckless at the largest scale, while remaining highly skilled inside an actual fight, a combination that is much more dangerous than simple rage. His anger never erased his military experience. Aatrox remembers the Age of Shurima, the war in Icathia, the struggles among the Darkin, and the methods used to imprison his kind. He understands celestial opponents because he has lived through their interference, and he understands betrayal because the Darkin were defeated through planning rather than a clean contest of strength. When he appears impatient, that impatience sits on top of a mind carrying thousands of years of conflict. The clearest demonstration of Aatrox's offensive power comes from his encounter with Pantheon. Atreus, a mortal warrior of Targon, had become the unwilling host of the aspect of war, which controlled his body and acted through him. When Pantheon faced Aatrox, the Darkin's strike did more than defeat the human vessel. The celestial power within Atreus was slain, and the heavens reflected the loss. That event stands apart from a victory over a durable physical opponent. An aspect is connected to celestial power beyond the ordinary mortal world, yet Aatrox proved capable of killing the divine presence acting through Atreus. The feat does not automatically mean his sword can erase every spirit, demon, or undead being in existence, because Runeterra's supernatural forces do not all follow one rule. It does prove that calling an enemy immaterial, divine, or immortal is not enough to place that enemy beyond Aatrox's reach. Atreus survived because the blow ended the aspect rather than the mortal will beneath it. Once free of Pantheon's control, he recovered and learned to draw power from the fallen aspect's weapons through his own determination. His survival would eventually produce the most important example of how Aatrox can be defeated in active combat. When they met again, Aatrox recognized the shield and spear associated with the fallen aspect and treated the mortal opponent as the weaker remnant of a god he had already killed. Atreus endured the battle, found strength in the people he meant to protect, and reignited the celestial weapon. His answering strike severed the arm that connected Aatrox's constructed body to the sword. The result stopped Aatrox without destroying the blade. That distinction gives us a complete picture of his strange durability. Aatrox can kill a celestial power, overpower armies, and build a towering body through blood magic. But one precisely placed attack can disconnect that body from the object containing his true essence. The sword survives while the campaign ends. Atreus did not prove that any determined mortal can simply defeat Aatrox. His weapons came from the aspect of war, his will could awaken their power, and his success followed a previous encounter that left him uniquely connected to the Darkin. Even so, the battle shows that Aatrox's vessel has a structural point of failure. Strength alone does not protect him if an opponent understands where the prison meets the body. This matters enormously against Mordekaiser. Aatrox cannot treat a suit of enchanted iron like a normal mortal host, while Mordekaiser is not likely to mistake the Darkin's body for the true source of his existence. Both have survived opponents who learned that destroying the visible form was not enough. If either has time to study the other, the fight becomes a contest over anchors, the sword that holds Aatrox and the spiritual binding that lets Mordekaiser manifest. Aatrox's other great advantage is the skill contained within that temporary body. He was a champion before Ascension, a god warrior after it, a survivor of the Void War, and a leader during the Age of the Darkin. His current form may be an imperfect reconstruction, yet the mind directing it retains experience gathered across several different kinds of warfare. Few opponents could match the range of enemies he has already faced. His massive sword suits that experience rather than replacing it. Aatrox uses reach, force, movement, and timing as parts of one aggressive style, while the body he shapes can display wings and tremendous speed despite its size. Gameplay names such as Infernal Chains and World Ender reflect important parts of his identity, though game mechanics should not be treated as exact measurements of what occurs in every canonical encounter. The story proves the broad abilities, it does not convert cooldowns, statistics, or arena rules into universal laws. That separation protects the matchup from an easy mistake. If every gameplay effect were read literally, Mordekaiser could always select one enemy, move that enemy into another dimension, and steal a fixed portion of power according to numbers designed for a competitive match. Aatrox could likewise heal through precise percentages and repeat attacks according to a player-controlled pattern. Lore does not operate on those fixed values. The safer approach uses the games as expressions of a fantasy, then checks that fantasy against narrative evidence. Aatrox is a sustaining juggernaut who becomes terrifying when combat supplies momentum, and his stories support that identity. Mordekaiser dominates opponents through necromancy, isolation, and control of a deathly realm, which his biography and color story also support. Exact combat mathematics remain outside canon. Aatrox's current position is active but unresolved. He walks Runeterra through stolen forms, seeks greater destruction, and remains an enemy of those who oppose the Darkin. The arrival of Zahen, another fallen god who hunts his fellow Darkin, while resisting their corruption, adds a living counterforce to the wider Darkin story. Nothing in that development establishes an Aatrox versus Mordekaiser encounter, and no official outcome has removed Aatrox's sword from the world. The Darkin Blade gives us 5 reliable conclusions. Aatrox possesses ancient combat experience, his sword can harm a celestial power, his blood magic can sustain an immense temporary body, the body depends on living material. And separating that body from the weapon can defeat his present manifestation. He is neither an unstoppable god, nor merely a large warrior. He is a captive ascended, whose greatest weapon and deepest weakness are the same object. Mordekaiser's story begins under a different sky and within a very different belief system. Before the iron armor, the Death Realm, and the name now feared by ancient sorcerers, he lived as the warlord San Uzal. He conquered across the northern wildlands in an era before modern Noxus, crushing resistance and building an empire through force. San Uzal believed that a great conqueror would receive a glorious place after death. The Hall of Bones represented the reward he expected for a life defined by victory, and approaching death did not frighten him because he assumed another form of dominion waited beyond it. His faith gave mortality a clear ending. The warrior would leave one kingdom and enter a greater hall prepared for him. Death revealed nothing of the kind. San Uzal entered a grey and empty realm where spirits gradually lost their identities, and the promised glory did not appear. No throne received him, no divine host confirmed his greatness, and the world beyond life seemed built to erase what he had accomplished. Many spirits faded into that emptiness. San Uzal refused. That refusal is the foundation of Mordekaiser's power. He did not begin his undead existence because a god selected him, or because an artifact accidentally preserved him. His will held together when the natural course of that realm pulled other souls apart, and his rage at being denied the expected afterlife became a new purpose. If no eternal kingdom existed, he would make one. Time in the Grey Realm changed what remained of him. San Uzal listened to the strange language of the dead, Oknun, and gradually learned to understand it. Knowledge gave him a route back toward the living, because he could whisper through the boundary and reach mortals interested in forbidden power. A group of sorcerers eventually answered. They believed they could call the ancient warlord into a suit of armor and bind the returned spirit to their command, turning a legendary conqueror into a weapon. Their ritual succeeded in bringing him back, though the control they expected did not survive the moment he spoke with the authority he had gained beyond death. The Revenant took the name Mordekaiser. His iron body did not restore San Uzal as an ordinary living man, and that was never the point. The armor gave a persistent spirit a shape in the material world, while necromancy supplied power that his first lifetime had never commanded. Nightfall, his great mace, became the symbol of that return. Mordekaiser used the souls of the sorcerers who summoned him as part of his new weapon, turning the failed binding into the first resource of his second reign. The lesson spread immediately. Death did not remove people from his reach, and service to Mordekaiser could continue after the body fell. His new empire grew around that principle. A living ruler can threaten imprisonment, labor, or execution, but Mordekaiser offered no release at the end of any sentence. He bound souls into service, forced the dead into his armies, and pursued knowledge concerning spirits and the realms beyond life. Every conquest could strengthen both his position in the living world and the domain he intended to create after it. At the center of that empire, he raised the immortal bastion. Modern Noxus now spreads around the ancient fortress, but the bastion predates the nation that claims it as a capital. To most inhabitants, it is a monumental seat of power whose oldest depths remain mysterious. For Mordekaiser, it formed part of a design connected to forbidden knowledge, death, and the boundaries between realms. This difference between a fortress and a plan is easy to miss. San Uzal had conquered territory during his mortal life, while Mordekaiser used his second reign to construct infrastructure for an existence beyond mortal rule. Stone, iron, sorcery, captured knowledge, and bound spirits all served a project that would continue even if his physical empire appeared to fall. His enemies eventually gathered around LeBlanc. The pale sorceress, who would become inseparable from the Black Rose, worked within Mordekaiser's court and helped turn members of his inner circle against him. Their betrayal banished the Iron Revenant from the material world, apparently ending his second reign. For the people who survived, that removal looked like victory. Mordekaiser's empire fragmented, his visible rule ended, and the fortress at its center later became the heart of another power. Tribes and warbands occupied the lands around the bastion, while the ancient tyrant passed into stories known only by those who preserved dangerous memories. Mordekaiser had anticipated betrayal. The souls claimed during his conquests passed into the realm of death, exactly where he intended to build his lasting empire. Losing the armored manifestation returned him to a territory filled with the resources his campaigns had gathered, and the apparent defeat gave the living world time to forget what waited beyond it. That preparation makes the betrayal unlike Aatrox's imprisonment. The Darkin were outmaneuvered and sealed into helpless objects, turning their weapons into cages. Mordekaiser was banished from one realm, but remained active in another, where he could continue building. Aatrox experienced centuries as confinement. Mordekaiser treated absence as another phase of conquest. Within the realm he calls Mitna Raknan, the souls under his control became soldiers and building material for a kingdom shaped by his will. Towers and structures rose where the grey emptiness had once offered nothing, creating the promised afterlife that Sanuzal never found. It was not the Hall of Bones given by distant gods. It was Mordekaiser's answer to those gods, built so that every soul would exist according to his order. The colour story known as the Final Reign presents that domain as nearly ready. Mordekaiser surveys the last stages of construction, measures the passing of time through souls still entering his control, and raises nightfall as his final campaign begins. The story does not show him completing a modern invasion of Runeterra, which means his return remains an approaching threat rather than an event with a settled result. His official description captures the pattern by calling him twice slain and thrice born. The phrase is not a promise that any possible defeat automatically produces another return under every condition, but it records the repeated failure of death to end his agency. San Uzal died as a man, Mordekaiser returned in iron, betrayal sent him back beyond the veil, and his will continued to rule there. Few living people understand the entire threat. LeBlanc remembers enough to fear his return, and the Black Rose has spent ages seeking powers capable of stopping dangers that ordinary Noxian armies cannot handle. Rel's control over metal made her valuable to that secretive cabal, with the Iron Revenant forming part of the larger reason such a weapon might be desired. Rel escaped their control, leaving any plan that depended on her obedience dangerously uncertain. Mordekaiser has enemies, but those enemies do not possess a confirmed permanent solution. LeBlanc once helped remove his physical manifestation, yet she knows that the banishment did not destroy him. The Black Rose can gather artifacts, train weapons, manipulate rulers, and hide knowledge inside the bastion, but preparation is not proof that any single measure will work. Modern Noxus adds another complication. Its rulers occupy a fortress created by Mordekaiser, without fully controlling every secret beneath it. And the Empire's political conflicts give hidden factions reasons to conceal what they know. Swain, LeBlanc, and the Black Rose pursue different forms of power, while most citizens understand the Iron Revenant as an ancient legend, if they know the name at all. The forgotten reputation benefits Mordekaiser. Aatrox announces his return through direct devastation, giving every nearby enemy a clear target even when they cannot stop him. Mordekaiser can prepare beyond the veil, while the living quarrel over a nation built upon his old seat of power. One threat advances like a storm, the other waits behind the walls everyone already uses. Mordekaiser's power rests on several connected abilities. His will resists the fading that claims ordinary spirits. Ochnan lets him command forces of death. Necromancy binds souls into service, and his enchanted armor creates a body capable of exerting enormous force in the living world. Mordekaiser extends that power across an entire domain, giving him soldiers, structures, and a home ground shaped by his intention. None of those facts prove that Mordekaiser is infinitely powerful. LeBlanc and her allies removed him once, which means preparation and magic can interrupt his physical reign. His anticipated return also suggests that crossing fully between realms requires conditions or a pathway, because otherwise the long delay would make little sense. The immortal bastion and the knowledge buried within it appear important, though the story does not provide a simple ritual that explains every requirement. His army is immense in concept, but not precisely numbered. Canon describes bound souls and an empire of the dead without giving a trustworthy total that can be inserted into a calculation. Any claim that Mordekaiser commands an exact number of soldiers would invent certainty the sources do not provide, so the honest comparison stays qualitative. He has accumulated a vast supernatural force, and its true limit remains unknown. The same restraint applies to the size of his realm. Mordekaiser is a constructed kingdom in the world of death, not a map with confirmed distances and population figures. Mordekaiser shaped order where there had been emptiness, but that does not automatically make him all-powerful within every corner of the afterlife. Domain advantage is real. Absolute control is not established. His most dangerous quality may be the connection between patience and ambition. Aatrox's plan demands an end large enough to reach his own prison, so every battle pushes toward destruction. Mordekaiser's plan benefits from accumulation, because each claimed soul can add to what he is building, and every century gives the living more time to forget. Delay frustrates Aatrox. Delay serves Mordekaiser. By the present era, the Iron Revenant remains in Mordekaiser and prepares to claim dominion over living and dead. Official material has not shown Aatrox entering that realm, Mordekaiser taking the Darkin sword, or either one acknowledging the other in a canonical meeting. That silence leaves the contest open, but their histories now give us enough to define the real question. We are not comparing a mortal swordsman with an armored ghost. We are comparing two separate failures of death, each anchored to the world through a different system. Aatrox persists because celestial sorcery trapped an ascended essence in a weapon. Mordekaiser persists because his will survived the Death Realm, learned its language, and built power through necromancy. The first comparison is physical strength, and this is where the images of the two characters can distort the answer. Both appear enormous beside ordinary warriors. Both carry weapons that demand tremendous force, and both are presented as capable of breaking organized resistance through direct combat. Their size tells us that neither is fragile. It does not tell us which one produces more force in the same moment. Aatrox has the stronger documented combat feat. Defeating the aspect of war required him to overcome a celestial power acting through an exceptionally capable mortal vessel, and his sword ended that divine presence rather than merely knocking Atreus unconscious. Mordekaiser has conquered vast territories and destroyed powerful opponents, but his published history does not give him a directly comparable victory over an aspect. That point belongs to Aatrox, though it comes with limits. The Pantheon encounter proves that Aatrox can reach beyond ordinary physical durability. It does not tell us exactly how the blow would interact with Mordekaiser's Ocnan magic, enchanted armor, or persistent spirit. A celestial aspect and an Iron Revenant are both supernatural, but they are not the same category of being. Mordekaiser's strength appears less concentrated in one famous duel and more distributed across his entire system of rule. He can fight personally with Nightfall, dominate battlefields through necromantic force, bind defeated spirits, and command an empire that remains useful after his physical form is banished. Aatrox's best feat asks how hard one warrior can strike. Mordekaiser's story asks what victory means when the enemy owns the destination after death. If their weapons met on neutral ground, I would expect Aatrox to move like the more practiced duelist. His experience began before he became ascended, continued through service as a god warrior, survived Icathia, and expanded during wars against others who possessed similar gifts. Mordekaiser also has more experience than almost any mortal commander. Yet much of his second reign depended on sorcery, armies, and calculated accumulation rather than repeated contests against peers of Aatrox's kind. The sword grants Aatrox reach and destructive power, while the shape he builds around it can change according to available material. Nightfall gives Mordekaiser a heavy striking weapon that also serves as a focus for necromantic authority. A clean exchange could damage either manifested body, though the consequences would not be equal. Aatrox repairs through living matter. Mordekaiser sustains an enchanted iron form through spirit magic. Armor presents another uncertain interaction. Mordekaiser's body is not simply a knight wearing a thick suit, because the armor provides the form through which the Revenant acts. Cutting the metal may disrupt that manifestation without touching a living body underneath. Aatrox's sword has overcome celestial power and should not be dismissed as an ordinary blade, so the iron shell cannot be assumed immune to it. Aatrox's body offers less conventional protection. Its resilience comes from scale, ascended power, blood magic, and the ability to replace damage with material taken during conflict. Strikes that would finish a mortal may only remove a portion of the construction, especially if a large battle provides Aatrox with more life to absorb. The body can nevertheless fail, and Atreus proved that the weapon arm is a meaningful target. This produces the first tactical race. Aatrox would try to break Mordekaiser's armor before his own vessel lost too much stability, while Mordekaiser would search for the binding between sword and host. Neither needs to understand every secret at the opening moment, because both have fought magical enemies before, but recognizing the true anchor first could decide the encounter. Speed probably favors Aatrox. His style includes sudden movement, broad attacks, and the use of wings in his greater form, while his history as an ascended warrior supports the idea that he is more than a slow wall of force. Mordekaiser is usually presented as deliberate and inevitable. That presentation suits a ruler whose pressure comes from control rather than pursuit. Speed does not mean easy evasion. Mordekaiser's magic can pull enemies, surround an area with harmful power, and impose his presence across a fight. Aatrox cannot circle forever, because his body spends resources simply by existing, and a long duel without living material would gradually serve the opponent who can wait. The faster warrior carries a hidden clock. Endurance splits into two categories. During active battle, Aatrox may recover rapidly when living enemies are available, turning a crowded battlefield into fuel. Across years, realms, and repeated manifestations, Mordekaiser has the better record of purposeful continuity. Aatrox survives longer than his body, but returns to a cage. Mordekaiser survives longer than his armor, and returns to a kingdom. That is why one word, immortality, fails to capture the difference. Suppose Aatrox destroys Mordekaiser's armor and scatters the visible form. The result may count as victory in the immediate duel, yet the biography gives every reason to believe Mordekaiser's spirit could continue in Mitna Ruknan, unless the strike also destroyed or permanently bound that spirit. Suppose Mordekaiser crushes Aatrox's host. The body falls, but the sword remains, carrying the same captive consciousness. Neither easy ending is permanent. Aatrox would need to do something his law has not explicitly shown: reach Mordekaiser's spirit in a way that prevents another return. Mordekaiser would need to destroy, claim, or contain an essence already held by celestial binding inside a Darkin weapon. Both outcomes are possible subjects for theory. Neither is an established ability we can hand to the character without evidence. The next category is magical versatility, and Mordekaiser takes a clear advantage. Aatrox commands blood magic with extraordinary skill, using it to seize bodies, reshape flesh, sustain his form, and amplify a campaign. That specialization is terrifying wherever living matter is abundant. Mordekaiser works with souls, enchanted metal, necromantic force, Oknan, travel or influence across the boundary of death, and the organization of an entire spiritual domain. More kinds of magic do not guarantee a win, but they create more possible answers. Mordekaiser may reinforce armor, attack the spirit, call bound servants, alter the space around a target, or force a contest under conditions shaped by death. Aatrox's blood magic answers physical damage extremely well, yet its usefulness becomes less certain against an opponent whose real body is not alive. The verified lore does not support the claim that Aatrox could absorb Mordekaiser. Aatrox reshapes living hosts and uses flesh to construct his form, while Mordekaiser appears through iron, animated by a persistent spirit. There is no confirmed example of Aatrox turning enchanted armor or a free undead soul into the same kind of bodily resource. The conclusion that Mordekaiser could simply steal Aatrox's soul also reaches too far. The Darkin's essence is not drifting freely through an ordinary afterlife. Celestial sorcery sealed it inside the sword, and the weapon has contained it through centuries of rage and attempted escape. Mordekaiser's ability to bind souls is relevant, but it does not prove automatic authority over a trapped, ascended consciousness. This is where the sword becomes more than a weakness. Its prison may also shield Aatrox from the normal journey into death, because destroying the body does not send his essence into the same fading realm where Sarnuzal once awakened. Mordekaiser is master of a system Aatrox does not naturally enter. To claim him, the Revenant may first need to understand or break a celestial seal designed for a completely different threat. Mordekaiser has one great reason to attempt it. He hungers for forbidden knowledge and has spent ages studying death, spirits, and the spaces beyond ordinary life. A sentient weapon containing an ascended god warrior would not look like debris after battle. It would look like a secret worth possessing. If Mordekaiser captured the sword without freeing Aatrox, he could achieve a practical victory greater than destroying a body. The Darkin might remain conscious, but unable to gather another host, repeating the captivity that already caused his deepest suffering. Mordekaiser could place the weapon within the Immortal Bastion, or Mitna Roknan, surround it with guards, and study the binding across centuries. Aatrox would understand that danger quickly. He has already endured one prison, and knows that defeat does not promise unconsciousness. Against many enemies he can charge forward, knowing the sword will survive, even if the body does not. But Mordekaiser is exactly the kind of opponent who would recognize survival as an opportunity for permanent control. Recklessness becomes harder when the enemy wants the cage intact. The battlefield matters more than it would in a normal duel. I will consider 4 settings: an empty neutral plain, a populated region of the living world, the heart of Mitna Roknan, and a full war in which both have time to gather everything they command. Each setting changes the resources beneath their most important abilities. On an empty neutral plain, Aatrox arrives with a stable host, and Mordekaiser arrives in his complete iron form. No armies stand nearby, no civilians provide Aatrox with additional material, and no prepared fortress strengthens the Revenant. This is the cleanest version of the duel, though clean does not mean simple. Aatrox would probably take the initiative. His experience tells him to test the reach, balance, and defensive habits of the armored opponent before the temporary body begins to deteriorate. Wide sword attacks could force Mordekaiser to defend several lines at once, while sudden movement would keep Nightfall from controlling the center of the fight without resistance. Mordekaiser would have little reason to chase every motion. His best answer would be to narrow the space, use necromantic force to interrupt Aatrox's rhythm, and make each exchange expensive. Aatrox gains nothing from minor injuries to empty armor if those injuries do not loosen the spiritual binding, while every lost portion of the Darkin's body matters when no fresh material waits nearby. The first successful heavy strike could mislead either warrior. If Aatrox tears open the iron shell and finds no ordinary body, he must adjust from physical destruction to magical disruption. If Mordekaiser breaks part of the red form and watches it move again, he learns that the sword rather than the visible anatomy directs the opponent. Ancient experience makes both adjustments likely. Aatrox has fought impossible beings from the void and celestial forces connected to Targon, so the absence of normal life inside the armor would not paralyze him. Mordekaiser built his second empire around spirits and forbidden magic, which means a weapon carrying its own will fit within the kinds of mysteries he actively studies. The duel then turns toward the weapon arm. Mordekaiser does not need Atreus' exact knowledge to notice how consistently the Darkin protects the connection between hand and sword, and his magic specializes in grasping, dragging, and controlling. Aatrox knows the risk and can shape his movement around it, making the target obvious but difficult. One precise success could end the manifestation. Atreus severed that connection with a celestial weapon, while Mordekaiser carries an enchanted mace backed by necromantic power. The lore does not guarantee that Nightfall can repeat the feat, yet it gives us no reason to believe the constructed arm is immune to sufficient force. Aatrox's answer is more direct. The Iron Revenant's armor can be struck, and the Darkin has already demonstrated power against a being whose existence extended beyond its mortal vessel. A blow from the sword may disrupt more than metal if Aatrox reaches the magic holding Mordekaiser together. I give Aatrox a slight advantage in this first setting. His demonstrated peak in a direct fight is higher. His speed and weapon skill help before environmental resources become important, and Mordekaiser lacks the full benefit of home ground. The advantage stays slight, because an empty field also denies Aatrox the living matter that supports prolonged recovery. Winning here means breaking the current manifestation, not ending Mordekaiser forever. Aatrox could stand over fallen armor and claim the encounter, while the Revenant's spirit withdrew beyond the veil. If Aatrox lingered to search for a permanent end, the problem would become much harder because he has no established method for navigating Mitnarachnan by choice. Now move the same fight into a populated region during a large conflict. Soldiers, animals, and other living beings surround the battlefield, while neither combatant begins with a complete supernatural army. Aatrox immediately becomes more dangerous because the environment can sustain the body he constructs. Every nearby struggle gives him a chance to replace what Mordekaiser damages. Blood magic can turn the flow of a battle into physical endurance, and a larger host lets Aatrox express more of the scale he remembers from Ascension. The longer ordinary armies remain close, the less effective gradual damage becomes. Mordekaiser gains resources as well, though not on the same schedule. Souls taken by death can fall under his influence, and fear can break an army before a ruler personally defeats every soldier. His advantage grows when the conflict shifts from living resistance to spiritual servitude. The two systems would compete over the same battlefield from opposite sides. Aatrox wants life available now, because living matter reinforces the body. Mordekaiser benefits when that life passes into death and becomes part of a force that does not tire in the same way. The battlefield is a bridge between their economies. That image helps explain why the fight may change direction. Early in the conflict, Aatrox can draw from abundant life and reach a stronger physical form, pressuring Mordekaiser before the Revenant's forces accumulate. Later, if the region empties and the dead answer Mordekaiser's authority, Aatrox loses fuel while his opponent gains servants. Aatrox is not likely to cooperate with any living army around him. His objective does not preserve soldiers for later use, and his attacks may consume the same people who could otherwise resist Mordekaiser. That indifference creates a strategic mistake in a prolonged war. Every life spent sustaining the Darkin may eventually enlarge the Revenant's domain, unless the soul escapes his control. Mordekaiser would exploit the pattern. He can afford to let Aatrox devastate forces that the Iron Revenant already intends to claim, while staying focused on the sword and avoiding a contest of pure force during the Darkin's strongest phase. Retreat is not humiliation to a ruler who measures plans across realms. The problem for Mordekaiser is surviving the early peak. An Aatrox supplied by a major battlefield may reach a scale capable of breaking the Iron manifestation before any slow strategy matures. The same strength that threatened an aspect can turn a crowded conflict into a rapid assault, and bound spirits do not help if the armor loses its connection to the physical world too soon. I still favor Aatrox for the immediate battle in this living setting. The abundance of material removes the greatest limit on his manifested body, allowing direct combat ability to operate near its most threatening condition. Mordekaiser retains the better long-term result if a destroyed form merely sends him back to an afterlife now filled with additional souls. That outcome would satisfy neither. Aatrox has not achieved the complete ending he seeks, and Mordekaiser has not captured the sword. The region between them is ruined, ordinary forces have paid the cost, and both immortal enemies retain a path toward another encounter. The third setting reverses the advantage. Place Aatrox inside Mitnarachnan, assuming Mordekaiser can bring him there, or another event opens the path. The Darkin enters a realm built from spirits and necromantic structures, surrounded by an army that has already passed beyond living flesh. Aatrox's first problem is material. His blood magic depends on living bodies, while the inhabitants of Mordekaiser's kingdom are bound souls rather than ordinary physical hosts. The lore does not establish that Aatrox can rebuild himself from spectral servants, black iron, or the substance of a death realm. His second problem is territory. Mordekaiser knows the realm, shaped its order, raised its towers, and commands the forces within it. This does not make every thought automatically law, yet it gives him control over routes, reinforcements, information, and preparation. Aatrox would be fighting an opponent and an empire at the same time. The third problem is time. Aatrox's constructed body cannot be assumed permanent merely because it crossed the boundary intact, while Mordekaiser has no need to offer a fair and immediate duel. He can test the vessel, withdraw behind servants, attack from prepared positions, and wait for instability to appear. Aatrox would remain tremendously dangerous. A realm of death does not erase the power that killed the aspect of war, and Mordekaiser's servants may be unable to contain the Darkin in direct combat. Towers can fall, spectral armies can be scattered, and nightfall still has to meet the sword if Aatrox reaches the ruler at the center. Destruction alone does not supply the resource he needs. Breaking a formation of bound souls may clear space without repairing the host, which turns every victory into expenditure. Mordekaiser designed his realm around permanent service, making losses there unlike the living bodies Aatrox normally converts into strength. I give Mordekaiser a clear advantage in Mitnarachnan. Home ground strengthens every strategic quality he possesses and attacks the exact condition Aatrox struggles to maintain. The Darkin might still break the armoured form in one exceptional exchange, but reaching that exchange before the vessel weakens becomes the central challenge. If Aatrox's body fails inside the Death Realm, the sword remains. Mordekaiser could then study a captive weapon without needing to transport it across the boundary, and his empire could guard the object indefinitely. This is the closest either character comes to a decisive practical victory under established rules. Practical does not mean absolute. Aatrox's essence would still exist unless Mordekaiser found a way to alter the celestial binding, while the sword's own corrupting will could threaten anyone ordered to handle it. The Iron Revenant might gain a prisoner rather than a servant, and attempting to use the weapon could create a new opening for possession. Mordekaiser would not need to wield it personally. A ruler with endless patience could isolate the blade, sacrifice controlled servants to learn how its influence spreads, and build layers of containment around every discovery. Aatrox's greatest opportunity would come from Mordekaiser's curiosity, because studying the prison requires some form of contact. Here the two wills matter as much as either weapon. Aatrox has overwhelmed mortals who touched the sword, while Mordekaiser's identity resisted the natural erasure of death and later broke the control of sorcerers who expected to command him. Neither has ever faced the other's exact kind of domination. There is no evidence that a spirit-animating metal would qualify Mordekaiser's armor as a host for Darkin blood magic. The reverse idea remains just as uncertain, because Oknun has never granted Mordekaiser confirmed authority to enter a Darkin sword and conquer the mind within its celestial prison. The most interesting possibilities remain deliberately unanswered by canon. I would not award either character an automatic victory in a battle of wills. Aatrox's consciousness survived centuries of unbearable confinement without dissolving, and Mordekaiser's consciousness survived the realm where ordinary souls fade. Their goals changed under that pressure, but neither identity disappeared. Any mental contest would join two of the most stubborn beings in Runeterra. The fourth setting is not a duel at all. It is a complete war, beginning with Aatrox active in the living world and Mordekaiser returning through the immortal bastion with the forces of Mitna Roknan. Both understand the other's nature, both can prepare, and ordinary nations react as the conflict spreads. Mordekaiser begins with the stronger organization. His realm contains structures and servants gathered for a final reign, while his mortal campaigns taught him how to administer conquest rather than simply win battles. The Immortal Bastion offers a historical center connected to his design, and hidden knowledge within Noxus may support or resist his return. Aatrox begins with stronger disruption. He does not need stable borders, supply lines, or obedience from a population, because he can move toward the greatest concentration of conflict and turn it into fuel. An army prepared to fight him may enlarge the very body it intends to stop. Their strategic objectives do not line up neatly. Mordekaiser wants to rule what remains and claim the dead. So he benefits from preserving useful structures under his control. Aatrox wants destruction large enough to end his prison, making every kingdom expendable. The Revenant builds an eternal order. The Darkin attacks the possibility of order itself. At first, that makes Aatrox difficult to predict. He does not need to defend a capital. And Mordekaiser cannot force surrender by taking land the Darkin values. Aatrox may attack the Bastion, a major army, a celestial site, or any gathering that promises enough power to advance the wider ending he seeks. Mordekaiser can respond through pressure rather than pursuit. His armies can occupy territory, close access to populations, and remove living resources before Aatrox reaches them. Every evacuation, conquest, or transformation of a population into bound servants denies the Darkin material while expanding the Revenant's control. That strategy is horrifyingly effective because Aatrox has no ordinary civilian base to protect. Mordekaiser does not need to bait him with loved ones or threaten a homeland. He needs only to make living matter scarce along the routes the Darkin is likely to take. Aatrox's answer would be speed and concentrated destruction. If he reaches the Bastion or Mordekaiser's primary manifestation before the surrounding world is drained of useful material, he can force the personal battle where his demonstrated power is greatest. A single successful campaign might break the gateway, scatter the physical army, and delay the final reign. Delay still favors Mordekaiser if his spirit and realm remain intact. Aatrox could win battle after battle while gradually consuming the same living world he needs, and every conflict might send more souls toward an enemy who treats death as recruitment. Tactical success creates strategic exhaustion. This is why I favor Mordekaiser in the complete war. He has a sustainable destination for every defeat, an organized realm, a supernatural army, and a goal that grows stronger through accumulation. Aatrox can destroy more in a single clash, yet destruction is not enough when the opponent's power continues after the battlefield empties. Mordekaiser also understands empires. San Uzal conquered one as a mortal, the Iron Revenant built another after returning, and Mitna represents a third form of rule. Aatrox once served an empire and later commanded forces during the Darkin Wars, but his current purpose rejects the stable control needed to convert victory into lasting advantage. Leadership style creates a sharp contrast. Aatrox inspires terror and may direct armies, though followers remain tools or material within his march toward the end. Mordekaiser binds service beyond death, producing obedience that does not depend on loyalty, wages, or shared belief. One gathers force around the next battle, the other gathers ownership. The ordinary nations of Runeterra complicate the outcome. Targon has reason to oppose Aatrox and knowledge connected to Darkin binding. Noxian factions have reason to prevent Mordekaiser's return, even while their divisions make coordinated action difficult. Demacia, Ionia, Shurima, Piltover, Zorn, the Freljord and other regions would not quietly watch two world-level threats fight without consequence. Outside intervention could damage either plan. Atreus has already defeated Aatrox's manifestation, LeBlanc has already helped banish Mordekaiser, and Rel's ferromancy may threaten enchanted metal in ways the Black Rose hoped to weaponize. Zahen now hunts fellow Darkin, adding another possible opponent who understands their corruption from within. Those forces prevent the war from becoming a private game between two pieces. Aatrox may draw celestial champions toward him, while Mordekaiser's return could unite enemies who otherwise despise one another. The more openly either threat expands, the more likely Runeterra's defenders are to repeat the pattern that ended earlier reigns, winning through alliances, knowledge, and carefully targeted magic rather than raw force. Mordekaiser might try to use those defenders against Aatrox. Every mortal army that slows the Darkin protects time for Mitna, and every fallen defender may strengthen the forces waiting beyond death. Aatrox has less reason to manipulate political coalitions when direct conflict already supports his body. But he could attack the people or artifacts Mordekaiser needs for a full return. The immortal bastion would become the natural center of the struggle. It is more than a symbolic throne, because its age and hidden purpose connect the living empire to Mordekaiser's design. Destroying portions of the fortress might delay a crossing, reveal secrets, or remove stored knowledge, yet the lore does not confirm that reducing the bastion to ruins would erase Mitna. Aatrox would likely view the fortress as both target and opportunity. Noxus can gather enormous military resistance around its capital, providing bodies that sustain the Darkin during an assault. Mordekaiser could allow those forces to weaken Aatrox while preparing the deepest defenses around the pathway that matters. The battle for the Bastion would reward both monsters and punish everyone else. Aatrox grows through the living conflict, Mordekaiser claims value from death, and Noxus becomes trapped between an ancient builder returning from below and a fallen god attacking from outside. No ordinary victory condition protects the population caught between them. If Aatrox reaches Mordekaiser at full strength, the duel could repeat the living world advantage I gave the Darkin. He may break Nightfall's defense, cut through the iron form, and force the spirit away from the material realm. That would be a spectacular battlefield victory, possibly the largest moment in the war. The answer comes one breath later. Mordekaiser has gone back to the realm Aatrox cannot easily reach. What looked like a finishing blow in the living world has only moved the conflict behind a boundary that the Darkin has never been shown crossing by choice. If the answer remains Mitna-Raknan, Aatrox has destroyed a door without ending the kingdom behind it. The Darkin may lack enough stable material to follow, and the defenders who survived may use the opening to separate him from the sword. A victory over Mordekaiser could leave Aatrox surrounded by forces that have already studied the weakness Atreus exposed. If Mordekaiser instead captures the sword, the war changes completely. He no longer needs to defeat every nation before removing his most destructive rival, and Aatrox's Living World campaign ends even though the consciousness inside the weapon continues. The Revenant can return to accumulation, while the Darkin returns to stillness. The long war favors the character who can turn an imperfect win into lasting control. Mordekaiser does not need to prove that he can erase Aatrox from existence. Containment is enough. Aatrox needs something closer to a permanent spiritual ending, because simply breaking the armor repeats a defeat Mordekaiser already designed around. This difference explains my overall verdict, but several common arguments deserve a closer look before I state it. The first says that Aatrox killed an aspect, so he automatically destroys Mordekaiser's soul with one strike. The feat makes that outcome possible. It does not make it certain. Pantheon's celestial power acted through Atreus in the material world and met Aatrox directly. Mordekaiser's spirit is linked to armor when he manifests, while his kingdom exists in a separate realm he has spent ages shaping. Aatrox can harm supernatural beings, but the precise rules of a Darkin weapon striking Ocnun-bound armor have never been published. The second argument says Mordekaiser controls death, so Aatrox automatically becomes his servant. That claim also skips the central problem. Aatrox does not die like an ordinary person when the host body fails, and his essence remains inside a weapon created by celestial confinement. Mordekaiser would face a bound immortal consciousness rather than a loose soul entering his realm naturally. The third argument treats Mordekaiser's gameplay ultimate as unquestionable proof that he can take Aatrox into the realm of death at any moment. The ability clearly expresses his connection to another dimension and his power to isolate an opponent, which is relevant. Competitive gameplay still compresses lore into fair rules, and the narrative does not establish that every being, artifact, or cosmic entity can always be moved with no resistance or preparation. The fourth argument uses Aatrox's gameplay healing as proof that he can recover endlessly against Mordekaiser alone. Narrative lore ties his form to absorbed living matter, while the Revenant's armor is not a living body. Without other sources nearby, the matchup does not provide endless flesh by itself. The fifth argument assumes that immortality means a draw. That conclusion ignores containment, banishment, and control. Neither warrior must be erased from existence for the other to win a battle, stop a campaign, or secure centuries of advantage. Atreus defeated Aatrox without destroying the sword, and LeBlanc's conspiracy ended Mordekaiser's second reign without destroying his spirit. Winning has several levels here. A combat victory means forcing the opponent's current form out of the fight. A strategic victory means preventing the opponent from returning before the winner completes a larger goal. A permanent victory means ending or containing the immortal essence so thoroughly that no future campaign remains possible. Aatrox has the better chance at the first level. His skill, speed, and demonstrated attack against the aspect of war give him a narrow lead when both appear fully manifested on living soil. Mordekaiser has the better chance at the second level because Mitna Rachnan, the army of bound souls, and his patient planning survive the loss of a single armoured form. At the third level, certainty disappears. Mordekaiser has a plausible path through containment of the sword, particularly inside his own realm. Aatrox has a plausible path through a strike powerful enough to damage the spirit binding Mordekaiser to his manifestation. Neither path has been completed against the other kind of being. There is also a deeper conflict between what they want. If Aatrox could permanently erase Mordekaiser, the Darkin would remove an obstacle and perhaps prove that his blade can end a spirit that has already escaped ordinary death. If Mordekaiser could permanently contain Aatrox, the Revenant would gain one of the most dangerous artifacts in Runeterra and prevent that artifact from destroying the world he intends to rule. Mordekaiser might prefer capture even if destruction were available. Forbidden knowledge has always served his expansion, and the Darkin weapon contains celestial binding, ascended essence, blood magic, and centuries of experience in one object. Studying it could reveal methods for controlling other trapped god warriors or defending Mitna Rachnan against celestial intervention. Aatrox could never safely accept that risk. His entire current identity grows from the horror of being aware inside a weapon without freedom, and Mordekaiser offers a future in which the prison gains a careful keeper. This emotional pressure may push Aatrox toward even more aggressive choices than usual, shortening the fight while increasing the chance of a tactical mistake. Mordekaiser has less emotional vulnerability in the same encounter. Being denied the Hall of Bones once enraged him, but he answered by constructing another reality rather than chasing a quick release. His pride is immense, and pride can still invite a direct challenge, yet his established plan shows an ability to convert humiliation and banishment into preparation. Temperament gives the Revenant another advantage over time. Aatrox is intelligent, but his goal turns patience into suffering, because every quiet year leaves him inside an imperfect or absent body. Mordekaiser can wait in a realm where waiting increases the scale of his final reign. The same century wounds one and equips the other. Neither is likely to fear the other's appearance. Aatrox has faced the void and celestial war, while Mordekaiser found emptiness after death and decided to conquer it. Intimidation may destroy ordinary morale around them, but the central opponents have already looked beyond the limits that frighten mortal armies. Respect is more likely than fear, even if neither admits it. Aatrox would recognize that the voice inside the armor belongs to something more persistent than a human sorcerer. Mordekaiser would recognize that the sword carries an imprisoned presence far older and more dangerous than the host around it. That recognition could briefly produce negotiation. Mordekaiser might offer Aatrox a place in the final reign, while Aatrox might direct the Revenant toward enemies connected to Targon or Shurima. Any alliance would contain an immediate contradiction. Mordekaiser wants an eternal world under his command, and Aatrox wants an ending that leaves no world to command. Their goals make permanent cooperation impossible. Aatrox cannot accept an afterlife empire that preserves existence. because continued existence is the cage he tries to escape. Mordekaiser cannot accept a world ender who intends to erase subjects, territory, and the realm itself. Each represents the failure of the other's final vision. This ideological clash may be more important than personal hatred. They do not need a shared past to become natural enemies. Mordekaiser sees every soul as part of an eternal order, while Aatrox sees all creation as material standing between him and a possible end. One says nothing will escape his rule. The other says nothing should remain. Their titles capture that collision. The Iron Revenant returns, rebuilds, and persists. The World Ender advances toward a conclusion from which return should be impossible. Iron shapes permanence. The sword seeks the final cut. Before the final verdict, I want to measure the matchup one last time through the qualities that decide it. Raw striking power goes to Aatrox, because the death of the aspect of war remains the strongest confirmed personal feat between them. Magical range goes to Mordekaiser, because his authority touches spirits, enchanted iron, necromancy. Another realm, and the servants bound within it. Combat skill leans toward Aatrox. He spent his earliest known history as an elite warrior, rose through ascension, survived the Void War, and later fought other god warriors during the Darkin Age. Mordekaiser was a peerless conqueror in his own mortal era, though his later power expanded into the work of a sorceress emperor, rather than staying focused only on the craft of a blade. Military command goes to Mordekaiser. Aatrox can lead and destroy armies, but the Revenant built successive empires and arranged for conquest in one world to supply rule in another. Even LeBlanc's betrayal served a plan whose benefits continued after his banishment, showing a level of preparation that extends beyond the next victory. Battlefield recovery goes to Aatrox when living material surrounds him. His constructed body can take strength from the conflict itself, making an early attempt to exhaust him extremely dangerous. Recovery across defeat goes to Mordekaiser, whose physical removal returns him to a functioning realm rather than a silent weapon. Home ground advantage belongs overwhelmingly to Mordekaiser. Mitna Ruknan contains his structures, servants, and accumulated knowledge, while its lack of ordinary living matter attacks Aatrox's ability to maintain a host. Aatrox has no equivalent private realm where the laws and resources naturally favor his method of survival. Mobility between battles is more complicated. Aatrox can travel through an active host and does not need to defend permanent territory, giving him freedom in the living world. Mordekaiser can exert influence beyond death, but appears to need conditions for his complete material return, so his greater cosmic reach comes with a narrower doorway. Knowledge is nearly even, though each understands a different half of the problem. Aatrox knows ascension, the void, celestial opposition, blood magic, Darkin conflict, and the nature of weapon imprisonment from the inside. Mordekaiser knows death, Oknan, soul binding, enchanted manifestation, empire building, and the architecture of his own realm. Adaptability during a duel leans toward Aatrox because his entire body is a shaped weapon, directed by ancient martial experience. Adaptability during a campaign leans toward Mordekaiser because he creates systems that keep working after a visible defeat. The difference repeats the central pattern. Moments favor the Darkin, while eras favor the Revenant. Their weaknesses are equally revealing. Aatrox must protect the sword's connection to his vessel, find living matter, and avoid capture after the body fails. Mordekaiser must maintain or regain a material manifestation, protect whatever pathway enables his return, and avoid magic capable of banishing or disrupting the spirit inside the armor. Aatrox's weakness is easier to see. Atreus has already struck the exact connection that ended a manifestation, and the sword remains a physical object that another force can carry away. Mordekaiser's weakness is harder to finish exploiting. LeBlanc's conspiracy proved he can be banished, yet the apparent victory delivered him back to a realm prepared for his arrival. Visibility matters in war. Everyone who sees Aatrox can understand that the colossal sword must be central, even if they do not know the full history of the Darkin. Mordekaiser's armor and mace look central too, but breaking them may leave the real ruler active somewhere enemies cannot follow. That hidden continuation makes the Iron Revenant a more difficult strategic target. Aatrox can win in public and still lose in secret, because the aftermath lies beyond his reach. Mordekaiser can lose the visible battle, preserve the invisible kingdom, and return after the living generation that celebrated his defeat has disappeared. I can now state the clean verdict. In one direct fight on living ground, with both manifested at full fighting strength and no prepared armies, Aatrox wins more often by a narrow margin. His superior documented feat, long martial history, speed, and ability to damage supernatural power give him the better chance of breaking Mordekaiser's armor first. That is not the final answer to the larger conflict. In Mitnarachnan, Mordekaiser wins clearly because the realm denies Aatrox his normal source of bodily renewal while surrounding him with the Revenant's prepared power. Across a complete war, Mordekaiser also wins more often because he can trade manifestations for time, use death as accumulation, and aim for containment of the Darkin sword. My overall winner is Mordekaiser, but it is a strategic victory rather than proof that he hits harder. Aatrox is the more dangerous opponent during the decisive clash. Mordekaiser is the more dangerous opponent after the clash appears to be over. The most believable sequence begins with Aatrox winning their first encounter. The Darkin reaches Mordekaiser before the Revenant has exhausted his host, withstands the necromantic pressure long enough to close the distance, and uses the same class of power that threatened a celestial aspect to break the enchanted iron form. Nightfall falls silent, and the living world sees Aatrox standing alone. For a normal enemy, that moment would end the story. Mordekaiser is not a normal enemy. His spirit returns to Mitnarachnan, where defeat becomes information. He now knows how quickly Aatrox moves, how the body restores itself, how fiercely the Darkin protects the sword arm, and how much power the blade can deliver against a supernatural binding. The next encounter begins with preparation that did not exist in the first. Aatrox gains knowledge too, but the value is unequal. He learns that breaking the armor does not expose a mortal body, and that the spirit retreats somewhere beyond immediate pursuit. Unless he also discovers a route into Mitnarachnan, the information tells him what failed without providing the missing solution. Mordekaiser can change the conditions. He can remove living resources, place bound servants between himself and the sword, prepare restraints around the weapon arm, and shape the conflict toward isolation. Aatrox can respond with greater speed and destruction, though both responses spend the temporary body he needs to preserve. The second fight becomes closer. Aatrox may still break the iron shell, and no amount of preparation makes Mordekaiser safe from the Darkin's proven offensive power. The Revenant only needs one different ending, not the destruction of Aatrox's essence, but the separation of sword and host. Once that separation occurs, the contest of strength stops. Aatrox remains inside the blade, aware and furious, while Mordekaiser's servants handle the object according to methods prepared in advance. Some may fall under the weapon's influence, but a ruler who treats souls as expendable resources can learn from every failed attempt. The sword eventually reaches containment. Mordekaiser does not need to trust one bearer, place the weapon beside his throne, or risk wielding it himself. Distance, layers of iron, Oknun wards, controlled servants, and the inaccessible geography of Mitnarachnan can all contribute, although the precise containment method remains speculative. The established point is simpler. Mordekaiser has a kingdom in which to keep a captured object, while Aatrox has no body once the object is isolated. That asymmetry gives the Revenant a believable win condition, using powers and habits already present in his story. Aatrox's winning path remains possible. If his sword can strike the spirit through the armor and destroy Mordekaiser's identity as completely as it ended Pantheon's celestial presence, the first duel may also become the last. Nothing in the lore rules that out. Nothing confirms it either. Granting permanent spiritual destruction because two targets are both supernatural would erase the distinctions Runeterra repeatedly makes among aspects, souls, demons, wraiths, ascended beings, and entities of the void. A careful verdict cannot turn one extraordinary feat into universal authority over every form of existence. Mordekaiser's victory requires fewer unproven steps. He must end or sever the temporary body and secure the sword, both of which fit known weaknesses. Permanently destroying Aatrox would require more. Containment already counts as success, because it prevents the World Ender from reaching the world. This does not make the result easy. Mordekaiser may lose several manifestations, sacrifice enormous forces, and watch parts of his carefully built realm fall before the sword is secured. Aatrox is exactly the opponent capable of turning a calculated plan into a disaster, even while walking into the intended trap. The cost explains why ancient powers might avoid provoking either one. A victory over Aatrox can leave an indestructible prison that still corrupts those who approach it. A victory over Mordekaiser can leave an empire beyond death preparing another return. Every apparent solution carries the seed of another crisis. For Runeterra, the best result would not be either monster winning. Defenders would need to exploit the conflict, allowing each threat to weaken the other's manifestation before using specialized knowledge to contain both anchors. Targonian understanding of Darkin weapons, LeBlanc's knowledge of Mordekaiser's earlier banishment, Rel's command over metal, and Atreus's experience against Aatrox could all matter. Even that alliance would be difficult. LeBlanc hides information as a source of control. Rel has every reason to distrust the Black Rose. Atreus opposes divine and tyrannical powers on his own terms. And Zahen's hunt for Darkin follows a separate struggle against corruption. The people with useful pieces of the answer are not a natural team. Mordekaiser benefits from their division, while Aatrox benefits from the battles their failed cooperation creates. Political delay feeds both threats in different ways. The Revenant receives time. The Darkin receives conflict. This is why their hypothetical meeting fits the deeper history of Runeterra. The greatest dangers are rarely defeated because a stronger champion arrives and wins a fair duel. Darkin were trapped through cunning and celestial knowledge. Mordekaiser was banished through conspiracy, and Atreus stopped Aatrox by striking the one connection that raw endurance could not protect. Knowledge decides what strength can only interrupt. Any final solution must identify where consciousness is anchored, how the anchor crosses realms, and what kind of magic can hold it without creating another opening. The sword and the armor are not costumes. They are the shape of the problem. Aatrox's tragedy is that his anchor preserves the life he no longer wants. Every body offers movement without true freedom. Every victory delays decay without restoring his ascended self, and every defeat returns the possibility of the cage. Mordekaiser's triumph is that he transformed his anchor into an instrument of chosen rule, using armor when he needs a body, and Mitnarachnan when the body is gone. One immortal experiences persistence as punishment, the other imposes persistence as law. That sentence contains the reason Mordekaiser eventually wins. He does not need the world to give him the afterlife he expected, because he can force the afterlife into the form he chooses. Aatrox needs the world to provide an ending that his prison has always denied, and every failed attempt leaves him dependent on the same living world he means to erase. The Darkin is stronger when the battle burns hottest. The Revenant is stronger when the battlefield grows quiet. If the video ended with only a name, that name would hide the best part of the answer. Aatrox can defeat Mordekaiser in a duel. Mordekaiser can survive losing the duel, learn from it, and arrange a war that the Darkin's temporary body cannot sustain forever. The final score is divided. Aatrox takes raw demonstrated combat power, speed, martial experience, and the first battle on living ground. Mordekaiser takes magical versatility, command, home territory, long-term endurance, and the complete war. Across the complete conflict, Mordekaiser wins overall. That judgment weighs the aftermath of every encounter more heavily than the spectacular moment when one weapon finally breaks the other's visible form. He wins after a long and destructive struggle, not because Aatrox is unable to harm him, but because harm is an incomplete answer. The Iron Revenant has already built his plans around returning from apparent endings, while the World Ender remains one precise separation away from becoming a motionless weapon again. The irony is that neither receives what he truly wants. Mordekaiser may contain Aatrox and preserve the world for conquest, yet the sword remains a hostile will that even his empire must guard. Aatrox may destroy the Revenant's visible form many times, yet every victory confirms that one more enemy can survive the ending he tries to create. Their conflict becomes a circle. Aatrox breaks the armor, Mordekaiser returns to the realm beyond death, the Revenant isolates the sword, and the Darkin waits for another hand to create an opening. Each proves the other's immortality without solving his own. That is the full lore behind Aatrox against Mordekaiser. It begins with two ancient conquerors who refused ordinary death, passes through Shurima, Ikathia, Targon, the rise of the Darkin, the northern empire of Sanu Zal, the immortal Bastion, and Mitna Raknan, and ends with two different answers depending on the scale of the question. For one fight, I choose Aatrox. For the war, I choose Mordekaiser. Since a rivalry between immortals cannot be settled by one broken body, the war is the result that matters most, and that leaves the Iron Revenant as the final winner.